Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for the event, and I welcome you. I am so excited about this webinar today, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of it, you will have the opportunity to access it later on and watch it. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's webinar you have a question for any of our panelists, please don't wait. Just submit your questions and we will try to get to as many as we can near the end of today's webinar. Also, at the end of today's webinar, we are doing a drawing for six $50, not $50, $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you'll be one of our 6 lucky winners. All right, with that, let's go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is Leading the Transformation, a panel discussion. We have 5 very smart, very talented people on today's webinar panel. And so without further ado, I would like to go ahead and introduce them, have them come on board with me. First one is Al Sargent, who is a Senior Director of Product at InfluxDB. Al, please join me, please. Hey, Al. Then we have Reese Arkins, who's Director of Product Management at WhiteSource. Hey, Reese, how you doing? Thanks for joining.
Thanks.
Next, we have Damath, I'm going to do this, Karunaratne, who is the CEO at ShuttleOps. Hi, Damath, how are you? Thanks for joining.
Hi. Then
we have Chris Nowak, who's Director of DevOps Advisory and Adoption at HCL Software. Hey, Chris, how you doing? Good, good. Finally, last but not least, we have Jeffrey Keyes, who is VP of Product at Plutora. Hey, Jeff, how you doing?
Fantastic. Happy Monday.
Awesome. All right, thanks. Happy Monday to you. I'm so excited to do this webinar with you guys. I know we're going to have a great discussion. Because of that, we are actually not going to be doing any slides for this presentation beyond this title slide and the one that I'm going to put up right now, because I think Jeff shared it with me last week, and it really is apropos of today's discussion, because we've been talking about digital transformation for a couple of years, and I think for a lot of people for a long time, digital transformation was one of those things that they talked about, but really didn't maybe move the needle too much. And then COVID-19 hit, and then all of a sudden digital transformation became a major priority for a lot of companies. So I wanted to put that up. There's obviously a lot of humor there, but at the same time, there's it's a pretty serious topic for a lot of organizations. So many of them are just trying to survive these days. So the thought of digital transformation may not be something that they really want to talk about or hear about, but it's definitely something that they need to be cognizant of. And so with that, if I can find my mouse again, there it is. I'm going to stop showing my screen and we'll just go to the video. So real quick, before we do kick off our conversation, I do want to just let the audience know that this webinar is based very loosely on an ebook that we've just put out called Leading the Transformation, believe it or not. And it is going to be available on all 3 of our websites, DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard. And everybody who registered for today's event will be receiving a link to access the ebook as well. So I thought in today's conversation, we'll kind of start with a journey of digital transformation, especially now in light of today's business landscape. Then we'll take a quick look at the risks that are involved, and these fine folks here will, I'm sure, be able to outline a lot of the risks and the ways that organizations are kind of getting past some of the risks and really moving forward with their digital transformations. We'll also take a quick look at some of the methodologies, some of the tools that organizations are using in their digital transformation journeys. then we always have to have a culture conversation. So that is definitely going to be one of the topics that we cover. And then finally, the success. I think digital transformation, much like DevOps, is really kind of a never-ending quest. But there are certain things that you can measure and recognize whether you have achieved at least some of the goal markers that you really need to in your digital transformation efforts. So without further ado, let's go ahead and kick off the conversation. Al, I want to start with you because I think I think we need to start obviously at the beginning, which is, really what does a typical digital transformation journey look like? When you've been dealing with customers, I know that each one is going to be different, but I would imagine that there are certain themes that run through each digital transformation journey. So why don't you kick us off and tell us a little bit about what you're seeing?
Yeah, what we're seeing in our customers is that fundamentally digital transformation is about rethinking the customer experience, rethinking operating models, and rethinking business models. And oftentimes it involves an established company trying to become more like the disruptors in their space. So for instance, Marriott trying to replicate the experience of Airbnb. And what we see is the best way to do a digital transformation is really an iterative cycle where you carve out a small incubator team that's more agile, has its own budget, has a modern technology stack, and is focused on a smaller yet visible digital transformation goal, digital transformation project. And what you do is, so they go ahead, they implement that project, you measure the results of the project, whether it's customer sat or customer usage, revenue, to build support in the organization for doing digital transformation on a broader basis. Then the next step is you figure out what lessons you've learned, what's worked, was it, what lessons are more applicable to larger organization, and then you share in that success, that people are aware of it, both inside the organization and among the customer base, and then rinse and repeat so that your incubator team continues to innovate, learn, and get new learnings that are applicable to the organization as a whole. And so that iterative approach really is, I think, the ideal way to go, and the one that we've seen has been most successful in our customers.
Excellent, excellent. You guys want to pile on here? Is there? Have you guys noticed anything that's maybe slightly different or additive to what Al's seen and the guys over at InfluxDB?
Go ahead, Dama.
Yeah, no, I think I've seen very much the similar approach take hold in many organizations. And I think, as part of that digital transformation journey where a lot of companies are really starting to focus too is, after that incubator team, how do you scale and get adoption across the organization, right? I think, it is one thing to get the success within a team, and then it's another thing to be able to spread that and be able to get the wider adoption. What I've seen, before now is there was less emphasis on some of that wider adoption. It was more about, okay, let's just do it well within one team. And then sometimes that wider adoption is really hard to come by without thinking through about some of those things up front, right? Not everything can be solved right away, but that scaling and what does it mean for the organization at large is really, really important to take into account sooner than later.
Absolutely. I was just going to say, I think there's a trifecta of things that are impacting the digital transformation process. Agile's been around for 20 years, and gosh, even big enterprises have been coping with how do they deal with Agile. DevOps, though, is a disruptor in process because it's taken two diametrically opposed goals of one group trying to build stuff, another group trying to just make sure they keep the lights on and don't change, and slam them together and say, you guys now have the same goal, so let's solve that. Meanwhile, in just the last couple of years, the rise of product-oriented teams demonstrating that the business has a new focus, and that new focus is to realize that software is very much a core of the business, and that moving and digitizing and improving the velocity and the value delivery is of the utmost importance. If you think of all the disruptors that have come, even in financial world, if the finance and financial tech world was doing their job well enough, maybe there wouldn't be things like Venmo or Facebook's new financial currency or these. Yeah, where do blockchain fit into these? And it would be interesting. They certainly have the resources to do it, but yet has it really been the efficiency to pull that off? And I think we're now seeing the culture of all that come together to say, now's the time. And with COVID, I think the acceleration of the need to do this even more. So, the old ways just won't work, and there's a new normal that's now in place. And like the ebook talked about how 50% of organizations roughly are going to have remote work be part of the culture. That's fantastic, but it requires a different kind of thinking.
Yeah, I'd
So
say
because of
to-
that,
oh, sorry, Sally.
oh,
I was just going to say prior
That's
to
all right,
COVID-19, probably the biggest driver of transformation was competition, as Jeff was leaning on. So, the more an industry was prone to a startup or an upstart coming in and say banking, finance, things at your fingertips, that tended to be the driver before now was like, well, we've got no choice.
mm-hmm.
The
So
point there's always going to be something, right? And so you need to stop pretending it won't happen that way. And I think the one thing I might add to Matt's points, I like them all, is what we've forgotten with DevOps sometimes is that feedback loop, is learning from what we're doing. I had I don't know if it's fortune or misfortune of being on the corporate side for many years, and we would build up great services, but they would fall apart because nobody tended the garden. And we would forget that it had to be a continuous process of feedback, not, okay, here's an innovation path and here's a stability path, and then just let it go, right? So I think that's going to be a key for successful digital transformation for sustainment.
All right. So do you guys think that because obviously the rules have changed with COVID-19 and digital transformation, do you think that maybe the way that organizations approach digital transformation now has also changed? I mean, obviously their parameters, their goals for a digital transformation are different, because it's no longer kind of a nice to have thing. Oh, it'll help us, get ahead in business and everything. Now it's almost like a survival tool for a lot of companies. So how does that kind of change maybe their mindset or their the way that they approach digital transformation? Anyone?
I think it's really expedited things. I also think, though, when we look at, where organizations are spending in digital transformation today, in light of COVID versus where they will be in 6 months or 12 months, I think that may change a bit. Like what I've been seeing a lot is people are trying to leverage existing investments or investments they were going to make in the short term more and more, instead of completely kicking off new digital transformation initiatives. And I think part of that is just given the current time we're in. But I think a lot of those digital transformation initiatives, which were maybe much further out now, have been pulled back into like the 6 or 12 month time frame, because they see the need to make those changes at a much more rapid pace today, right? And there's a lot of people, I guess, who are somewhat laggards and were not really wanting to change, but now they're forced along. Charlene, like you said, it's more about survival now and not if this is a nice to have.
I think doing things remotely over video, whether it's engaging with employees through video meetings, whether it's doing online events such as this one, or in place of your regular user conferences, or engaging with customers over Zoom or some other tool. COVID's really forced us to do that, and we can't just hop in a plane and travel somewhere. We need to do things digitally. So I think the whole video conferencing aspect of COVID that COVID has forced us to do, I think has really been an accelerant to digital transformation. And if you start meeting with all of your teammates and colleagues over video, it just becomes that much more natural to meet with your customers over video. Let's say if you're a car insurance application, show me the video of the damage over video, just to name one example. And there you go, digital transformation. But it's been normalized. through our interactions that we have, our internal actions over video have normalized or are beginning to normalize video interactions with customers.
And an extension of that we're seeing too, for the software development and process as that's gone, where a lot of the meetings went from we used to meet in person to now let's meet in video to now what we're seeing happen is people are relying on the tooling more, because whether I get on a joint meeting together or I just listen to the notifications coming from the tooling itself, much more trying to just push things into the tools themselves so that we don't have to worry about that. And then, oh, let's go work on automating that. Let's work on just making all that just happen. And I get notified when the right things are going on. And we meet to figure out how to rely on the tools better. And what a great, I mean, isn't that the whole point? That's the feedback loop that you're talking about, Chris. We start seeing what's working in the process.
I think there's a danger there too, right? Where we depersonalize it too much. So I think I would just say we have to watch that, right? Years ago, I had a team working for me, and I saw these guys, they were chatting back and forth, and they sat back to back on a cubicle. And I realized they were actually chatting with each other. I go, what are you guys doing? Spin your chairs around. And so I would just say, I completely agree with you, right? It's going to help us, but I think we want to watch that depersonalization, that's all.
Wow. I don't think that's any different from having two teenagers in the house who chat with each other. They never say two words to each other. Not that I know anything about that, but yeah. Well,
we were at dinner last night and got a Snapchat from them. They were just like, hey, why are we getting a?
Too funny. Well, that actually brings up another point is I think the digital transformation, because of what's happening now with COVID, I think it's actually changed not just the priority of having or undertaking a digital transformation project, but actually kind of maybe hyper-focusing on exactly what is needed in digital transformation. It just kind of crystallizes it from this nebulous kind of, ooh, we need digital transformation to, we need the bandwidth, we need the technologies, we need to be able to interact with customers on any platform that they want to interact with. So I think that's, in a way, if there's a positive to come out of all of this, it's the fact that we've really been able to recognize and understand what digital transformation needs or means for a lot of companies. So, but along with that, obviously, it's not all wine and roses. I know that there are a lot of risks associated with digital transformation projects. So, Reese, maybe we can kind of talk. I can kind of turn it over to you. You can tell us a little bit about what you think are maybe some of the underestimated risks of digital transformation projects and really what organizations should be looking out for.
Right. So when we talk digital transformation, of course, we're mostly talking software, right? Software is eating the world. I'd say that one of the most underestimated things for people that are, building increasing amounts of software is they don't realize just how much of software these days is open source. So it's like that, the proverbial iceberg, right? Where the software that you write, that your customers see, is the bit above the water, and the open source that you rely on, the shoulders of giants you stand on, is that iceberg that's under the water. And this, kind of this 90-10 kind of split has some interesting effects because, to your end customer, it's all what you're delivering. So if it's your website or whatever app or whatever you're delivering, that's you. Even though to you, 90% of it might be things someone else is writing, the customer holds you responsible. The other really big effect it has is that people can sometimes underestimate, they think that they can do some type of transformation and it's like one and done. So we build it, it fits the requirements, that's it, like put a cap on it, we're done. And the challenge with that is that when you write your own software, if you write bad software, you might get lucky and you never have to fix it because no one finds out. But when open source has problems, you get vulnerability alerts. People find it, it's made public. And what that means is that you actually have no choice but to keep up. So you can't just sort of put a cap on it and say that software project is done, because if it's 90% open source and that open source has vulnerabilities, then you have no choice but to keep moving. So to some companies that might feel like running to stand still, but that's just the reality when you do, benefit from open source, is that you have to keep up with it as well.
Yeah, I think another risk is, I think, it's interesting when you think of the term digital transformation, it does imply, like Riss says, that it's one and done, but it's really it should be a continued process. And so, here's a story from way back in the day, but back in the mid 90s, Oracle wanted to have a more approachable way to get to its database, to get to its development tools. It developed a tool suite under the leadership of then VP, a guy named Mark Benioff, and it got a lot of success. It was very innovative. It was much easier to use than Oracle's traditional tools. But then Mark went off, of course, to start Salesforce, and that product line withered away. So in that case, it was a question of, essentially a charismatic leader who is leading a digital transformation at Oracle left the company. And so I think that's another risk, is when you look at your leadership team and your executive team, does the digital transformation have support within the entire leadership team, or is it just really one influential person? And because if it's just one influential person, you might not be able to sustain that over the long term.
I 100% on that. I've actually seen DevOps transformations fail for exactly that reason. Once the leader left, it fell apart. Then it was just another automation platform. And it's really important that you build the entire service or whatever you're doing, the transformation, around more than just that one charismatic person.
Yeah, and I would say it's even more than just one charismatic person. I've seen people like core on like very technical teams. They're not a charismatic person, great individual contributor, and then they leave, and then that really slows things down or derails projects. So that's happened, with multiple customers we've had, because the space for these type of people, it's very hot, right? So they're jumping from company to company, and so it's how do you maintain that knowledge in your organization and continue to push forward if you were to lose, a couple of those key individuals. But on top of that, I think the other risk that there is here, or challenge, is the cost to maintain automation, right? It's because it's not a one and done thing. You have all these platforms, if you're talking about delivering software from end to end, that you have to connect, but just standing those up isn't really enough, right? It's about what does it take to maintain all of that over time, and then scale it out and onboard teams. So there's a lot more at play.
It's an interesting point. Sorry, just trying to go.
I was just going to say another risk is not realizing that you're not gonna just go buy a suite of tools and now be digitally transformed. You never arrive. This is a program like going to the gym. You just always do it. It's a continuous improvement process. You're looking at a way to take what is a traditionally monolithic, top-down structure, culture, command and control, and transform that into a bunch of independent, self-running, safe kind of organizations that are going to make mistakes, and that's okay, but you have to give them some guidance, because they'll get more velocity and throughput by being independent versus being centrally commanded and controlled. And finding the way to transform that organization is what's hard. That's the risk, is going from one influential to a lot of influencers, and the conglomerate of those influencers with the power and control to be able to do that. That's the whole process.
Yeah, I agree. And excuse me, Jeff, to your point, the fact that it never really ends, I think, is probably one of the biggest barriers that organizations from a cultural perspective really have to overcome. Just letting the board know that, this is not just going to be a line item for this year. This is going to be something that we've got to continually fund, and if we're going to stay on par with our competitors and really succeed in today's marketplace. So we've said it before, that digital transformation means something different to every company, but I imagine to that end, the approach, how organizations actually approach digital transformation, whether they decide to do it all in-house, whether they decide to outsource it, is also going to be very different. And Domith, I'm interested in talking to you or finding out from you about kind of what we're looking at as far as how organizations are approaching digital transformation, maybe in-house, and do you see a lot of organizations actually utilizing like no-code or low-code tools to actually affect digital transformation in their organizations, or is it something that they're using kind of more as say an add-on, if you will, as you know, as these projects get away, it's just kind of a way that they can kind of jump in and enhance it themselves?
Yeah, and traditionally, I don't think you have seen that many organizations using low code, no code tools. But over time, especially over the last couple of years, there is a movement now to start using more of those low code, no code tools. And I think part of that has been related to some of the challenges we just talked about, related to personnel and keeping people in the organization and making sure you have the knowledge within the organization. So what no code and low code really does do is it does help democratize that DevOps or digital transformation process, right? When you're looking at software delivery and how can more people get involved? Because, you know, when you say DevOps, you first think of dev and ops, but in reality, there's a lot more teams than that, right? There's security, there's the business stakeholders, and how can people be more involved in that process to make sure you have your software delivery aligned to business processes, it's meeting the needs of security teams. And you know, the no code and low code platforms allow people who aren't very code based to be more involved in the process, while, you know, at times still allowing people who really need to get under the hood and into the code that opportunity to do so. So I think it's not about, you know, whether you use just no code or low code, but it's, you know, what's the right combination of code, low code, no code for your specific organization, because every organization is different. They're going to have different tolerances to it. And so what works for you, and just to start thinking kind of in that mindset and how you democratize and scale out some of the digital transformation processes.
Excellent. Excellent. So do you guys see as a whole more organizations kind of outsourcing a lot of these digital transformation efforts, or do you see them kind of moving in-house? Anyway.
Well, by him and Han, because it would almost say, how do you transform the organization so that it's a bunch of smaller teams? It's really hard to outsource that. They'll bring in consultancies to help with the process. They'll bring in consultancies to help with portions, but ultimately it's up to the organization to rethink it. Telefonica did a whole spiel about how they're transforming their organization and how they're going to move, their new ways of working. And I think that was a great manifesto for them to go down the path of talking about. But it takes that kind of vision to understand that, in essence, that large enterprises need to transform themselves into being, it's like when I was at Microsoft, I felt like I was working at a startup. I was competing sometimes with internal teams, competing with external teams, and corporate office was just a matter of a VC that had to go pitch to and be funded every 6 months. And that's really the way every team ought to feel, that you're moving forward. You've got a product and a vision, and you're going to maximize the value for your customers and put these pieces together. You're going to listen to the metrics of delivery. You're going to listen to the customer results, continuously experiment, fail fast, improve, automate as much as you can, pull these pieces together. And pulling that into, you're going to need potentially some consultancy help to understand that cultural change. You're going to need low code tools in some places where you're going to augment the core of the development processes so that you're making the right investments in the things that matter, and having low code for things that don't. You're going to need to have ways of communication so that you can change the culture. There's a lot to it, man. And it's, not for the faint of heart, but there's only one way forward. You can't just sit there and go, we'll try that next year.
Right.
It's evolved.
Those days are long gone.
They are. They really are.
Yeah. Go ahead.
You can't outsource leadership and accountability. It won't work, right? If anything, insource it. Lean on some experts, bring in some consultants, but hire the talent, right? It's always about your people and your talent. And I mean, again, I've seen a lot of this fail. I did some consulting for a while, and it was leaders that tried to outsource all of that. It's not going to work.
Yeah, like transformation is a pretty strong word that we're using, and it doesn't really imply that you can just purely outsource it. I mean, lots of consultancy help can be great, but it's got to come from, you know, from within. I saw there was a business survey in the US just last month. We talked earlier about COVID-19 accelerating it, but it also mentioned that about a quarter of all companies said that they would be spending less on innovation this year as a result, right? And that's really interesting because it depends whether people were classifying this as truly a transformation or some little, you know, innovative projects with consultants or innovation teams. So I think the companies that truly embraced transformation and said, no, this is the only way forward, this is an accelerator. For those who weren't fully committed, we may see them pulling back, and maybe also to their detriment, because you'll enable startups and competitors who are transforming to accelerate more.
Yeah, but and just to take a little bit of a contrarian view, I completely agree that you cannot outsource leadership. Certainly, you can have consultants make suggestions on what to do, but it needs to be organizationally driven internally. However, clearly from a technology provider aspect, we've seen plenty of cloud providers, the AWSs of the world, for instance, serve as a platform for digital transformation. And so I think outsourcing the technology piece to different IaaS and SaaS providers certainly should be thought of as a way to work faster and in a more innovative fashion.
Oh, yeah,
and I think, you know, a good takeaway from that is just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it, right? And I think a lot of people are always like, yes, I can do that, and I will do that, but that may not always make sense, especially depending on the velocity you want to move at.
I think the dividing line is you should always think about, you know, is outsourcing the technology aspects of it, is that a good idea? But from a people perspective, if you're the ones that are going to run this thing for the long term, it has to be in-house.
Yeah, I think just like serverless doesn't mean literally no servers, you know, low code, no code doesn't mean literally no code. Both cases, they mean like it's someone else's responsibility. So that's completely fine, and in fact recommended. It's just pick someone very responsible, you know, if you're going to do that.
All right. So, you know, we've kind of danced around the idea of culture a little in some of our conversations here so far, but obviously, you know, you've got to have the buy-in. You've got to have folks on board who are willing to kind of get their feet wet and really embrace digital transformation. But you know, I imagine there's a lot more to it than that. So, Chris, I want to get your thoughts on this. You know, what's necessary for digital transformation? You know, from a cultural perspective, what do organizations really need to recognize about digital transformation?
You know, I thought about this and I took a step back and I realized I'm not sure I knew what digital transformation meant. And so I Googled it and found that there's a lot of different ideas, which made me think about what does DevOps mean, right? It's the same question. You know, you go into a company and we don't like, hey, it has to be automation, it has to be Jenkins. It's, you know, what is DevOps going to mean to you? How are you going to measure your success? And so I thought it was really interesting because, you know, probably the biggest thing that came out of what is digital transformation, it's applying technology to basically a business that's already undergoing a transformation. And if you think about it that way, it's kind of like you've got to change transformation, which we already know, you know, maybe 30% success rate. And now you're going to throw digitation on top of that too. So let's just, you know, cut it way down. I think an HBR article I read said like 16% success, right? So what I do think though, that the successful area we can come to it is we've had to deal with this in technology and DevOps for a long time. And I've always, at least I believe that, you know, DevOps is a transformation within technology. And it isn't just technology, right? It's in technology, but it's not just automation. It's your people and your process and all of that. And I think that when we talk about a digital transformation, which is really about modernizing the business in many different ways, we can bring those lessons. And we've all been through those wars now in technology with DevOps. That's something we can offer them. We can say, look, we know you're going through basically a people change, but we also know the technology side of it, and we can help you. So it makes it more complicated, but I also think that a lot of us have kind of been through it. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's about people. I just always believe that it always is, right? And I think if anybody in DevOps, the one thing you'll all agree on, or we all agree on, is it's collaboration and people. Like you can argue about everything else. And so I think when we talk about, well, what does it really mean? It still goes back to the fundamentals of people. And it's still all about basically give people a why, give them a purpose for why you're doing it. Let them understand it so they can become autonomous and decentralized. Give them some guardrails. Let them know how they're aligned. Like to your point, just because I can do it doesn't mean I should. Say, well, why are you doing it? Is it aligned to one of the business goals in this transformation? And then what falls out of all of that is just a transparency and communicate, over communicate everything. So if you give them a why, you give them some boundaries, and then you say, you know, we're going to help you get there. I think that that's how you do it. And it's really no different than the same model we've used for 20 years. How do you move an organization? And, you know, talent is your biggest, the biggest cost and your biggest secret weapon. So I kind of look at it that way. It goes back to the same formulas.
So, you know, I think one of the things that we can learn from COVID is that, you know, people were forced to do things that they have previously felt uncomfortable doing. And, you know, we've now reached a level where we don't, you know, we can go on a daily Zoom meeting and talk to everybody, or we can, you know, we can do work from home, and it's not going to, you know, it's okay if the dishwasher is running and all that good stuff. But, you know, I think when it comes to digital transformation, I think, you know, because people were forced to do things, they recognized that maybe it really wasn't that difficult, and their biggest barrier was what was in their mind, you know, mentally. And to your point, we had this conversation earlier, Chris. You said that, you know, people discovered that they could do things and do them fairly quickly, and it's really not impossible to accomplish these things. So do you think that there was kind of this mental barrier, if you will, to a lot of digital transformation efforts, you know, beyond just kind of the, you know, the budgets and kind of pushing it back because it's not really a priority? But do you think that there was, before, maybe folks were just kind of thinking, we're just not really going to be able to get our company, quote unquote, digitally transformed?
Yeah, no, I think that one of the greatest things that came out of this was exactly what you said. People were like, you know, we all fall into the trap. Well, this is how I do it. We do things, we form habits because it's comfortable and it provides us with a, you know, a known path. But that's also a trap. If you're trying to innovate, you know, this danger of this is how we've always done it, right? Those are the words that get you fired. So I think it did, right? It shook a lot of people up and a lot of companies up, and it said we have to do something. And it didn't feel like like it was a big difference, but I mean, we've all been doing this now for a few months on Zoom or whatever, you know, your choice meeting is. We're behaving very differently. People are turning on their webcams. People are taking showers to get in front of the camera every morning, right? Instead of having their day jammas, I think is a term I heard, right?
The day jammas. I like those. I hadn't heard that one. That's good. Yeah. Well, so what about you guys? I mean, have you noticed kind of a shift, if you will, in kind of the mindset with a lot of organizations as they talk about digital transformation now? I mean, do they really see it as the big barrier that it was once before all this hit?
You know, most of the folks that I've talked to believe they're already on the path and believe they're going down it and just trying to figure out the right way to do it. In fact, you know, pray tell, I can't imagine you would ask someone, how are you doing your digital transformation? And someone would say, oh, we ain't doing that. You know, that's for other folks, you know, not us. But getting into what it actually means and how the process is going, I don't think a lot of people actually know. It's still this big fuzzy thing, and where are we, and what does it actually mean, and gosh, what does it look like? Seems kind of scary. But I think DevOps actually adds some teeth to the journey, because DevOps and the journey to achieving more DevOps-oriented practices is prescriptive. And it's where the power of the closer you are to DevOps practices and culture, the closer you are in your journey of achieving success in digital transformation, because there's a lot of linkage there. And especially as you combine agile practices with DevOps practices, bring them all together, manage your value streams. I mean, that's the point. You know, let's look at it from where you were before to where you are in a quarter from now as you're making experiments down this journey. So I think it's cool to watch the process.
Yeah, I think bringing some data to the discussion. One thing that we do with Influx Data is we monitor a lot of software, we monitor IoT sensors. So a lot of our customers are using us for some kind of to implement some kind of digital transformation project. And we've seen usage up across the board, whether it's new users signing up, daily active users, amount of data stored. There was a drop off probably in early second half of March, and then after that we've just kind of been rising up since then. So I think there was sort of an initial hit as people sort of, left their offices, had to get their home office set up. That took about a couple weeks, and then since then it's been steady upward. So yeah, companies appear from that measure to be digitally transforming.
Yeah,
and culturally, sorry,
go ahead, Reese. Okay. To that point, like culturally, I think people do have a lot more confidence because they're like, hey, we just got through this. We've shifted how we work, which we didn't think was going to be possible or doable in this time frame. And now they have a bit more confidence to look at some of these challenges that lie ahead with digital transformation and take them on in a more aggressive way than they would have before all of this hit. So I think that's one of the positives that's really come out of this from a cultural perspective.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to add culturally, I think at least to be successful long-term, part of it is to realize that it's not just something that has an easy finish line. The actual digital transformation is kind of continuous. Like if someone talks about a health transformation, they don't say, okay, so you're gonna exercise, you're gonna eat healthy, we're gonna transform your body, and then you're done. Like then eat burgers and everything. I mean, so actually this investment in technology, the continuous use of technology, it's not so much the journey, but it's the destination.
All right. Yeah, I agree. And I think that I don't think there are enough organizations that really do think digital transformation as a never-ending journey. So I said it before, it's not just a line item for 1 year on the budget. It's something that's going to have to be ongoing and iterative. So, but
Sure. I think it's important to emphasize, I think that's why a lot of it fails, right? Because they think, all right, I got it done. And in their mind, they have, oh, it's a 36-month project or whatever. People have to completely forget about that way of thinking. I think it was Scott Adams, the Dilbert. He's interesting. He said, I have systems, not goals. And I thought that was really interesting because I'm successful because I set up a system for myself that allows me, sometimes I fail, but it gives me a way to get back on. Whereas if I fail a goal, it feels very terminal. And I think that's how we have to look at these things. It has to be a journey and it has to be a system. It isn't just, okay, I'm not going to say where I was, but I sat in a meeting with a fairly large consultancy talking about DevOps a few years ago, and they said, oh yeah, we're done. We did DevOps last year. And from a consultancy that's fairly large, I mean, I didn't want to say anything. We have to avoid that.
Yep.
So then, because of that, because you could have systems and not goals. How do you measure progress? I mean, how do you measure the value of digital transformation then, Jeff? I'm pulling you into this one. If we don't have, are there guideposts or how can a company, data aside, if you don't have, say, okay, we're going to have this goal of whatever, and how can a company actually measure whether their digital transformation projects are successful and are valuable to their end users?
Well, that's a great question. I happen to love it because that's the whole point behind, what does, that's, if we're a game show, what is value stream management? That's the point. Peter Drucker is quoted as, you can't improve what you don't measure. I've heard it said that that's not really true. You can improve it. It just like a tree falling in the forest. How would you ever know? How would you ever prove it? How would you decide that that is what it is? The point of digital transformation, using sort of the calm kind of mentality, is not just culture, but the automation and the measurement of those processes, if you will, from value delivery to velocity to quality and so forth, are all pretty critical. I saw a couple years ago a bit of research done by Forrester, and when asked the question, they asked the question most, to I don't remember, X number of enterprises, of how do you measure the success of your software delivery? And by and large, the number one answer was, did we blow up production? How many bugs were introduced? And pretending that matters. Okay, yeah, that's important, but is that really the goal of delivery? It's a difference of the mindset of that's not the right question. So much of an executive view might say, well, let's look at the velocity. What's our capacity, and are we increasing? Okay, can the developers press more keystrokes every day, and that's a measurement of improvement. Ultimately, we need to start looking at value delivery of the entire pipeline, looking at the resultant. What is value, and actually being able to answer what is value. How do we decide value? Who decides value? Do we decide value? We delivered this many packages, so we're doing a great job. Or are we looking at it from more of a business perspective? I think this is also where the project to product mindset change is starting to have an impact, because every year the PMO organizations and most enterprises are having to find out a set of work and saying it's going to impact and provide this much value to the organization. Therefore, we should spend this much money. But when followed on and asked, are you actually measuring how much value it actually delivers? Ain't nobody doing it, which is mind-boggling to me. So we set this all through it and go look at it. So measurement is key, and measurement is critical, not only at the macro level of what are we doing, but to each transformational effort, to each experiment that's run, to look at the improvement that's done. The way we like to look at how do you get started with value stream management, for example, is you, in essence, do a value stream map, meaning from idea to production, idea to getting it into customers' hands. What is the process, and what are the major steps that go on there? And then make a hypothesis about how you could improve. And that hypothesis is measurement, driven, if you will. It's I think we can save this amount of time. I think we can improve this much quality in the delivery, and then therefore produce this much value. And then hooking up the tooling, value stream management platforms, if you will, to actually see, did we do what we thought we did? If not, that's okay. It was an experiment. We'll find area, more than likely we're going to have made some success, but we want to use those measurements to then decide, okay, let's go now improve the next thing. Don't fall into the mistake of thinking, well, really my digital transformation means automation and automation alone, or let me go implement tool X or tool Y, or let me go do scaled agile, because then that's the answer. You really have to look at what your current goals are and look at where they really need improvement, and then use tooling to measure that from your experiments.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think when we look at this, it's really about understanding the current baseline and what those processes are. I think that's where a lot of organizations can struggle, is they don't even have today's processes well defined, but they want to get better automated processes in place. And then how do you, show that value to the business if you can't define what you have today to be able to quantify what your success looks like? So, yeah.
Right.
All right. Any other thoughts?
I was going to say that you do have to be careful about what you measure, though, because once you set KPIs, you got to make sure that they are hopefully like unequivocally good. So for example, if you say, well, we're going to measure our success by the number of claims submitted online rather than through our call center, that sounds great. Right? But if the result of that is that people, the company neglects its call center, people have 1 hour waiting times, and they submit online out of frustration rather than ideally they wanted to talk to somebody, that's not necessarily like a win, even though for the KPI. So, be cautious with what you measure, because, another quote, show me your incentives, I'll show you the results. Yeah, that's the only word of caution in terms of measurement, is be aware that it can also distort the outcomes.
That's a really good point, Reese. In fact, there's fear of doing measurement for exactly that point, because the culture of measurement basically is, well, if you show me that, if I'm gonna meter you or incent you based on user story, just that one, for example, which is, I think, asinine, right? I'm gonna go incent you on the number of bugs you fix. That was another Dilbert, right? And he says, well, I'm gonna go write me up a new minivan. people are always going to game it. And there has to be a culture of transparency. There has to be a culture of safety, so you don't shoot the messenger. So that, the idea is we measure to understand where we are today so that we can create improvement. A great litmus test for how we're doing culturally is, can one development team share its DevOps metrics with another or with management? And if the answer is no, before you start getting into that, you should at least dress, the process of what those measurements look like. And we could go across everybody's tooling here, right? Can I look at what's my open source results, or what's my current monitoring data, and how far and wide those get shared? What's my level of automation? These are just tooling to give us an idea of where our measurement is, but we need to first address the culture of it so that we can know how we're going to improve and change it so that we're all in the same boat of trying to just run experiments. Some are going to fail, most are going to succeed, and we're going to use these measurements as a way to improve the process.
Yeah, I think making sure that I think it's a great point in terms of saying, what are we measuring, and making sure that we're measuring the right things. And I think it's important to measure from the outside in, measure from the customer experience in.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for instance, with Disney Plus, they measure user experience from the smartphone, from the smart TV, from the tablet, whatever someone's watching on, to make sure that customers have a good experience. But I think if you start from that outside in perspective, from the customer perspective, and then cascade down from there into more specific KPIs, I think that really is the best way to go.
Absolutely.
Right.
That's spot on, because as you decompose the again, back to, you do a value stream map of the entire process, you hypothesis about an area, you drill in on that, expand it out, you then measure, well, how are we currently doing? And then you rank some improvements, measure the end result, and then you can take a look at it from that end to end and say, oh, here's how we're doing. But please don't ever, incense somebody on, well, your MTTR is getting worse. Uh-oh.
Right.
Don't.
All right, well, we are about 8 minutes to the top of the hour, so I want to give us just a couple minutes at least for question and answer period. So, but before I do that, I just want to give you guys, last call basically for any comments regarding digital transformation that we haven't covered, but you think is really important to let the audience know about. So I'm just going to open it up to you guys and let you say your final comments if you have any.
Well, I was just going to say, if you haven't thought about a value stream management platform, it's the driver behind your digital transformation effort. Otherwise, yes, you can make improvements, but how will anyone know? We can help you govern the process. We can help you really identify the bottlenecks that you ought to focus on next. Because if you fix anything that's not the bottlenecks, okay, you haven't fixed anything that's really going to affect the long-term flow.
All right. Anyone else?
I would say avoid boiling the ocean when you do digital transformation. Pick projects that will have a short time to demonstrate payoff. So break things up into chunks and demonstrate incremental progress quickly, and convey this message that it really is a journey. That's going to become a habit. It's not a one and done.
I'd say put in place processes and automation to help you manage what you've already built. So don't let the things you've already built, decay for whatever reasons we mentioned earlier. I mean, have in place a structure to maintain those and keep them as good or better than they were when you first built them.
All right.
Yeah. I think really understanding your people, the people you have to work with, and what the internal, external processes look like. Do you bring in consultants? What processes make sense for your team and other teams around you? I think that's critical.
And I guess it kind of ties into all the points too, but just remember that when you're going through these transformations, it is about change, and it's a very personal thing. And we're all afraid of change, right? It's unsettling in many ways, either because of an unknown or because we wonder where we're going to be when it's done. And just when you're going through these things, remember that everybody is going to be thinking that way, even your leaders. And And again, if you can do more of the whys and the transparencies and show them there's a better place, you know, we're not automating to take a job away, we're automating to free you up for higher level thinking, right? That's the conversation you have to have. That's really important. And the only other part was we all tend to think concept to cash, SDLC, and everything. We got it to prod, right? Well, that's just where the journey starts, actually. So we have to start thinking beyond that production boundary, and and we can talk about it, right? What's that user experience? Where's the real value? The value isn't getting it to prod. The value is somebody using it happily after prod. And so that creates the feedback loop. So again, we're kind of self-limiting our journey by saying, I got it to prod. That's just where it starts.
All right, great. Well, let's see, we're 5 minutes to the top of the hour. I think we have time for one question. So let's go ahead and just dive in. I think this is a great question to ask. Who should drive the digital transformation? Should it be business savvy people or the IT software guys?
I think everybody. So
yeah, I'd say both. All the above, right? It's that everyone has to be on the same page when you look at transforming an organization and processes, because it's not just technology, it's people, process, culture, as we all commented on today. So it has to be all of them.
Yeah, it really has to be both technology and business working side by side. Run your IT like a business. If you kind of want a blueprint for it, the book Turn the Ship Around, create clarity and competence, and then empower your people and get out of the way.
And I think it's also important to look not just horizontally in the organization, but also vertically within the organization. It is something that needs to be embraced at the top levels and also all the way through down to the individual contributors. So you need to have it needs to be driven by a key leader within the organization who has the authority, who has the budget to affect that change. But then also it needs to have the support of the individual contributors. So I think, as Chris mentioned, people need to realize that, look, we're transforming not to take your job away, but to do better as a business and to better serve our customers and increase the longevity of your job and your organization. And so because when you have that support of people at the lowest levels in the org, they're going to make sure that things are successful with the digital transformation.
I was just going to say, outside of working at one big company, the entirety of my career has been little software startups, and I've loved it because the focus is there. You either do or you die. And I wish that mentality, and I don't mean that in a physical sense, but you only have so much money to live on, and you've got to make and maximize the return on your investment. It's not a project. It's not just this thing that's going to get done and we'll start the next one. It's either you figure this out or you'll go on and have to find another job. And
don't make payroll.
We really ought to have that mentality in everything we do.
All right. All right, guys. Well, we're 2 minutes to the top of the hour, so unfortunately, that's all the time we have for question and answer period. But please, everybody who did submit questions, thank you so much. Please know that these guys are getting a copy of all the questions, so I'm sure they'll be more than happy, or somebody from the organization will be more than happy to follow up with you offline and get your question answered. So I do want to thank everybody who did submit questions. Before we get things closed out, I did at the top of the hour mention that we were going to be doing a drawing for 6 $25 Amazon gift cards. So let's do that real quick before we close things out. Today's winners are Al W, not Al Sargent, Al W, Anne Marie F, congratulations, Don M, congratulations Don, Diane F, congratulations Diane, Louise J, congratulations Louise, and finally Ramon C, congratulations Ramon. We're going to follow up with all of you offline via email to get your gift card over to you, so please check your inbox. Hopefully it should show up there. If not, check your spam folder. Let's see, I also want to remind the audience that today's event has been recorded, so if you missed any or all of it, or if you just want to watch it again, you'll have the opportunity to do so. Probably about an hour or so, we'll be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the DevOps.com website, so you can always go look for it there. Just go to DevOps.com/webinars, look in the on-demand section, and it should be right there waiting for you. Al, Reese, Damath, Chris, Jeff, thank you all so much for your time, your insight, your expertise. Just so many great conversations flow, and I'm just so happy. So thanks again. Really appreciate your being here today.
Thanks, Charlie.
Yep. Thanks,
All
Charlie.
right.
Thanks.
Excellent. Also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am signing off. Have a great day, everybody. Please stay safe.